What if darkness was not the opposite of holiness, but part of its mystery? What if the sharpest moments of your struggle, the doubt, the temptation, the inner war no one else sees, were not signs of failure, but proof that something sacred is being refined within you? These are not the kinds of questions asked in comfort, but they are the ones that matter most. And at the heart of such questions stands Samael, an angel feared, misunderstood, and often dismissed, yet utterly woven into the divine fabric of judgment, purification, and truth. In the common imagination, angels are radiant guardians, harbingers of peace, bearers of good news, defenders of the weak. But scripture and sacred tradition speak of other kinds of angels as well, messengers who do not soothe, but confront, forces that shake the foundations not because they are corrupt, but because their mission requires it. Samael belongs to this hidden category. He is not fallen, but feared, not a rebel, but a refiner. His name surfaces in the writings of the mystics, the Apocrypha, and the oldest layers of Jewish thought, not as a symbol of evil, but as a shadow created by divine light. To approach Samael is to approach paradox. He does not comfort the righteous. He tests them. He does not destroy out of hate. He exposes with precision. He is the force that God permits to come near when comfort would only delay maturity. In this role, he becomes something more than an accuser, more than a tempter. He becomes the crucible of transformation. And yet, he remains a servant. He is not outside God's will, but within it, precisely where he was designed to be. Perhaps this is why his presence provokes unease. Not because he opposes God, but because he forces us to see how deeply we misunderstand God's ways. We love grace, but we avoid correction. We welcome blessing, but fear the process that prepares us for it. Samael does not give what is easy. He gives what is necessary. He operates where clarity begins, not in serenity, but in tension. And when he draws near, it is often the sign that something hidden in us is about to be revealed. Take a moment here to reflect on this. If you've ever faced a trial that felt unbearably specific, a temptation that seemed tailored to your soul's weakest point, consider the possibility that it was not random, that it was allowed, that it had purpose. If this kind of message opens your eyes to the deeper meaning of your own struggles, then subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Like the video if you're finding value in this journey, and let us know in the comments how these words speak to you. Your voice matters more than you know. This is just the beginning. The mystery of Samael cannot be rushed or reduced. As we move forward, we will uncover not just who he is in the heavenly order, but what his presence reveals about the divine logic of judgment, mercy, and transformation. And as we do, remember this: not all that disturbs you is against you. Sometimes, the shadow you fear is the very thing preparing you for the light you were always meant to carry. In the depths of ancient Jewish mysticism, where symbols dance with meaning and every letter bears the weight of eternity, the figure of Samael emerges not as a mistake, not as a deviation, but as a deliberate creation within the order of heaven. He is not born out of rebellion, nor does he arise from pride or defiance. Instead, his being is spoken into existence by the same divine voice that formed the stars and summoned the breath of life into clay. His purpose is not to disrupt for the sake of chaos, but to fulfill a function so precise and so critical that without it, the balance of the cosmos would falter. To understand Samael is to step into the logic of paradox, where darkness serves light and confrontation leads not to ruin, but to revelation. His name, traditionally interpreted as venom of God or severity of God, carries with it a sharp edge, a truth that wounds in order to heal. It is not the venom of hatred or rebellion, but of justice that stings before it purifies. Some mystical writings suggest that Samael's very essence is rooted in Gavura, the divine attribute of strength, judgment, and discipline. Where chest represents mercy and kindness, Gavura tempers it, restrains it, and delivers accountability. Without Gavura, the world would overflow with unchecked grace, and in such a flood, meaning itself would dissolve. Samael, then, stands as a vessel of this attribute, not opposing God, but completing the spectrum of divine expression. He is not Lucifer, not a fallen angel seduced by his own beauty or corrupted by the thirst for power. The Zohar, a foundational text of Jewish mysticism, hints that Samael was appointed to his station from the very beginning. He is not thrown down from heaven, but walks in its halls, charged with duties that others cannot perform. His role is not the result of some celestial tragedy, but of divine intention. This is perhaps the most unsettling element of his identity, that the one who is love, who is light, who is perfect in holiness, created an angel whose work involves challenge, disruption, and death. In this way, Samael becomes a mirror reflecting not only divine justice, but human discomfort with it. We are quick to embrace the attributes of God that soothe and affirm us, but recoil from those that demand examination, those that cut through illusion and expose what lies beneath the surface. Samael was not made to comfort, he was made to confront. His presence in the heavenly order is a reminder that holiness is not softness, and that true righteousness often requires the dismantling of false peace. The sages who wrote of him did not speak lightly. They treated his role with gravity, recognizing that in the divine council, there are voices appointed to speak hard truths. In the book of Enoch and other apocryphal texts, echoes of Samael's influence can be heard in the descriptions of angels tasked with delivering judgment, executing wrath, or enforcing the boundaries between the sacred and the profane. These are not rogue agents, nor are they malfunctions in creation. They are woven into the fabric of divine administration, essential to the integrity of heaven's rule. Samael, by his very design, provokes discomfort. But this discomfort is not a flaw, it is a spiritual catalyst. The soul that encounters Samael is not merely punished, it is awakened. Through his work, illusion is stripped away, pretense is shattered, and the true condition of the heart is revealed. He does not destroy at random. He does not accuse without permission. He acts within the perimeter of divine command, never straying beyond what has been ordained. His name may carry a bitter taste, but the bitterness itself is a form of medicine. In the same way that a surgeon must cut to heal, Samael's presence cuts through what is diseased in the human spirit. He does not offer gentle correction. He offers necessary confrontation. And in that confrontation, transformation becomes possible. The ancient mystics understood this balance. They knew that a world sustained only by kindness would collapse under the weight of indulgence. Likewise, a world ruled only by judgment would suffocate under severity. But in the union of the two, in the tension held between mercy and justice, the fullness of divine wisdom is revealed. Samael occupies that space. He is the edge of the blade that guards Eden. He is the storm that clears the air. He is the guardian of consequences, placed not to punish arbitrarily, but to ensure that every action bears its rightful weight. It is easy to mistake his presence for hostility, just as it is easy to confuse trials for abandonment. But those who see beyond appearances begin to understand that his role is not meant to crush the soul. It is meant to reveal its worth. By challenging the heart, by calling out pretense, by allowing trials to pierce our comfort, Samael opens a path that leads not away from God, but directly toward Him. This is the divine paradox. An angel created not to sing praises, but to test. Not to protect from pain, but to allow it in measures that refine. He is not loved in the same way as Raphael or Michael. His name is not called upon with joy. Yet he is no less necessary. His work, though severe, is part of the architecture of grace. In the heavens, nothing is accidental. Even what feels like destruction may, in truth, be preparation. And so Samael stands fixed, obedient, unrelenting. He does not bend to human sentiment. He does not flinch at suffering. He performs what he was created to perform. And in doing so, he plays a role so sacred that it remains hidden from casual eyes. Only those willing to look into the shadow without turning away can begin to glimpse the depth of his purpose. Only those who endure the fire can see the gold that survives it. In the creation of Samael, we find no betrayal of goodness, but a deeper understanding of what true goodness requires. Not just comfort, not just mercy, but justice, truth, and the courage to be changed by both. The story of Eden, often told in straightforward lines of innocence lost in paradise closed, holds within it a far more layered and mysterious reality than many first realize. When seen through the mystical traditions of Judaism, the events that unfolded in that ancient garden begin to shift in meaning. They do not simply mark the tragic beginning of sin, but unveil a divine strategy, one in which even the act of temptation plays a vital and sacred role. Within this reimagined perspective, Samael enters not as an enemy of heaven, but as an instrument of heaven's will, walking silently within the body of the serpent, carrying out a task not of rebellion, but of obedience. In the traditional telling, the serpent is a deceiver, a corrupter who lures Eve away from purity and into transgression. Yet in the deeper currents of Jewish mysticism, especially within the writings of the Kabbalists, this figure becomes a symbol of something far more profound. The serpent is not independent. He is not rogue. Eve standing before the tree is not merely a character in a story. She becomes the symbol of the human condition, capable of choice, driven by curiosity, drawn by desire, yet bound by the tension between trust and autonomy. Samael, in the serpent's form, speaks not with open hatred toward God, but with a question that pierces the surface of obedience. He does not force the fruit into her hands. He does not shout. He suggests, he invites, he opens the possibility. And in that opening, the soul is revealed. If Samael's presence in Eden was an act of obedience to a divine command, then the temptation itself was never outside the boundaries of God's design. It was a gate, not a trap. It was not meant to ensnare humanity, but to awaken it. The fall, in this light, becomes less about disgrace and more about departure, an exile that leads to return, a descent that opens the way for ascent. The forbidden fruit was never a mere object of rebellion. It was a catalyst for transformation, a doorway through which knowledge, pain, growth, and ultimately redemption would enter. Mystical texts like the Zohar speak of the fall as a necessary concealment, a veiling of the light so that it could later be discovered with greater depth and maturity. Samael's role in that process is not villainous, but sacred. He does not act alone. He acts within a structure where even the act of tempting is enveloped in divine permission. In this context, the serpent is not an intruder in Eden, but a visitor on assignment. Samael, far from acting with autonomous malice, performs a task that others were perhaps unwilling or unable to perform. He approaches humanity not to corrupt it permanently, but to activate within it a spiritual tension that would give rise to longing, repentance, and return. Without this confrontation, Adam and Eve would remain in a state of untested harmony, a peace that lacked the depth of choice, the weight of self-awareness, the refinement that comes only through struggle. The very name of the tree of knowledge of good and evil hints at a complex reality. Knowledge of both extremes cannot come through mere instruction. It must be tasted. It must be lived. The fruit contains more than flavor. It contains awakening. And that awakening could not come without someone to introduce the question, to hold out the possibility, to stretch the soul beyond the safety of its beginnings. Samael in this narrative is that someone. To say that he was fulfilling divine will does not erase the cost of the fall, nor does it diminish the sorrow that followed. Shame entered the world, death entered the world, and humanity's relationship with God became marked by distance and longing. But in the logic of redemption, distance becomes the road to depth, and longing becomes the path back to the divine. Samael, as the one who introduces that first fracture, becomes paradoxically the first actor in the great drama of return. This does not make him gentle. It does not make his presence comfortable, but it reframes his nature. He is not evil for the sake of evil. He is the hand that presses, the whisper that exposes, the trial that unveils the heart. In Eden he does not destroy, he invites choice. And with choice comes both risk and potential. From this vantage point, the serpent becomes a figure of sacred confrontation. His words are not lies in the crude sense. They are distortions, reflections in a cracked mirror. He speaks of eyes being opened, and indeed they are. He speaks of knowing good and evil, and indeed that knowledge comes. But what he does not reveal is the pain that knowledge will carry, the weight it will impose. Yet even that omission serves the divine script. For without pain, there can be no genuine compassion. Without separation, there can be no reunion. The plan moves forward, not in spite of Samael, but through him. And so the garden is lost, but something deeper is found. Humanity begins its journey, not as puppets in a paradise, but as beings who have tasted both desire and consequence. Samael recedes into the background, his task complete. He leaves behind a world forever changed, a humanity forever marked by the knowledge of both good and evil. And in that marking lies the seed of something greater than innocence, wisdom. This wisdom is not easily won. It is purchased with tears, with toil, with generations of wandering. But it is true. And it begins with a question whispered in a garden, a fruit held out, and a choice made in full freedom. That moment, charged with paradox, remains the foundation of all human striving. It was not sabotage, it was sacred tension. Samael did not force the fall. He merely opened the gate. And in walking through it, humanity stepped not only into exile, but into the long and winding path toward eternal return. In the unfolding drama of the heavens, where each being holds a place of precise design, there is one whose footsteps carry the chill of finality, whose shadow marks the end of mortal time, and whose name is whispered with both dread and awe, Samael, often named the angel of death. Yet what if death, in the hands of this servant, is not cruelty, but cleansing? What if wrath is not the sign of a fallen spirit, but of an incorruptible loyalty to a justice that refuses to be compromised? To see Samael through the eyes of fear is easy. His title alone evokes the image of endings, of separation, of that sharp edge which no soul can escape. But mysticism teaches that behind what appears to be destruction lies something far more ordered, something fiercely sacred. Samael does not kill because he despises life. He brings death because it is appointed, because it is necessary for the order of creation, because without it, eternity would become stagnant and unclean. He does not execute wrath as an act of vengeance, but as the extension of divine decree. The Kabbalists often spoke of the duality within God's expression, the right hand as the hand of mercy, the left hand as the hand of judgment. And Samael, walking under the authority of the left, does not act out of passion or personal will. He acts from alignment. He becomes the instrument through which the divine holds the world accountable. He does not initiate death, he fulfills it. Every breath taken and every final sigh released passes through the unseen threshold of his office. To understand Samael as the angel of death is to recognize the uncomfortable truth that death itself is not evil. It is not the product of chaos. It is a boundary set by wisdom. Psalm 90 verse 12 says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Without the end, the journey would lose its meaning. Without the cutting away, new growth would not arise. Samael carries out the final act of time so that the eternal can be revealed. In his hands, death is not the end of the story. It is the punctuation that makes resurrection possible. And wrath, so often confused with hatred, becomes in Samael's mission a form of clarity. In the face of rebellion, in the presence of corruption that refuses to be healed, divine wrath does not explode in mindless fury. It moves with precision, with measured intensity, and with unwavering obedience to justice. Samael, in those moments, becomes not the symbol of divine rejection, but the assurance that nothing impure will be allowed to endure unchecked. He burns not because he desires destruction, but because purification demands fire. It is tempting to imagine divine love as soft, as always comforting, as never cutting. But such a vision is incomplete. Real love guards the sacred. Real love defends the innocent. Real love does not allow darkness to grow unchallenged. Samael's actions, fearsome though they appear, reveal a love that refuses to compromise with evil. He is not the one who breaks the world. He is the one who breaks what is already broken, so that it may be rebuilt in truth. He is the executioner not of vengeance, but of justice. His blade does not swing at random, it moves only when permitted. In rabbinic literature, Samael is not free to act of his own accord. He waits for the decree. He observes the measure. He delivers not judgment of his own, but that which has already been spoken from the throne. When he moves, it is not out of impulse, but out of perfect timing. In some texts, he is described as bearing the cup of poison that brings the final breath to the body. Yet this cup is not filled by him, it is handed to him. The bitterness it contains is not of his making. It is the fulfillment of a judgment rendered by the one who sees all, who knows all, and who alone decides when a soul's journey through this world must close. This role, difficult, heavy, often shunned, requires a kind of holiness that many overlook. It requires the ability to carry out what must be done even when it brings no praise, no reward, no affection. It is the path of obedience beyond comfort. Samael does not flinch at the weight of his task because he was formed for it. His very nature reflects a facet of divine reality that many would rather ignore, that sometimes what saves the soul is not a gentle hand, but a consuming flame. And still, he is not divorced from mercy. The mistake is to imagine justice and mercy as rivals. In truth, they are partners. One restrains, the other releases. One wounds, the other binds. And in the tension between them, the soul is both humbled and healed. Samael works from within this dynamic, never against it. His left hand may bring the blade, but it does not cut without the wisdom of the right. What he ends only when redemption has been either rejected or completed. This understanding reshapes how we see divine wrath. It is not rage, it is holiness reacting to what defiles. It is purity insisting on the restoration of what was lost. Samael, in this sense, is not the dark reflection of God. He is the strict servant of God's holiness. He is the angel who walks through plague, who oversees the transition from this life to the next, who ensures that the appointed hour is honored. Without him, mortality would become chaos, and justice would lose its teeth. His presence reminds the living of the weight of their days. His silence at the bedsides of the dying is not absence, it is faithful presence. And when he moves, he does so in fulfillment, not in ambition. He has no hunger for death. He does not rejoice in judgment, but he bears it all the same, because in the architecture of divine wisdom, someone must. This is the left hand of God, not separate from love, but love in its most uncompromising form. A love that burns away pretense, a love that refuses to allow the soul to remain stagnant, a love that clears the ground for new beginnings by faithfully ending what can no longer remain. Samael serves this purpose with unshakable fidelity. What terrifies us about him is not his rebellion, for he has none. What terrifies us is his clarity. He does not soften the truth, he enforces it. And in doing so, he reminds us that the God of mercy is also the God of justice, and that to serve him fully requires the courage to wield both. In the celestial courtrooms where light and shadow do not compete, but coexist within perfect balance, there is one voice that speaks not in praise, but in challenge, a voice that does not comfort, but confronts. This is the voice of Samael, not as tempter, not as destroyer, but as accuser. His task is not to lead souls astray through deception, but to present the unvarnished truth of who and what they are. He stands not outside the gates of heaven, clawing at its walls, but within its very chambers, speaking under divine authority, with a role that is both unnerving and indispensable. Unlike the figure of the deceiver who seeks to ruin out of pride, Samael functions more like a prosecutor whose charge is to question, to examine, and to reveal. He is not given authority to condemn, only to accuse. His voice does not pronounce final judgment. It draws attention to the soul's contradictions, to the fractures that are often hidden beneath the surface of even the most righteous life. In this role, his words are sharper than swords, but they are not weapons of chaos. They are instruments of refinement, designed to cut away illusion and bring the heart to a place of undeniable clarity. The book of Job offers a striking portrayal of this function. In its opening chapters, the sons of God present themselves before the Lord, and among them is the accuser, Ha-Satan in the Hebrew, often interpreted through the figure of Samael in later mystical writings. He does not act on his own. He appears when summoned. He speaks only when permitted. And his challenge to Job's righteousness is not an act of defiance, but of strict participation in divine justice. He raises a question that pierces the veil of outward devotion. Does Job fear God for nothing? This question, like so many of Samael's inquiries, is not designed to destroy Job, but to test the substance of his faith. It is a confrontation with motive, a probe into the authenticity of righteousness when blessings are stripped away. And it is God who allows the trial. Samael does not move beyond the boundaries of permission. He initiates the test, but the terms are not his to set. In this dance between divine sovereignty and angelic assignment, Samael's voice serves a necessary purpose. It draws into the open what otherwise remains hidden, even from the one being tested. Accusation, in the hands of Samael, is not slander. It is exposure. And exposure, when governed by divine justice, is not cruelty, but mercy in a severe form. The soul cannot be transformed unless it sees itself fully. The hidden sins, the unspoken fears, the silent doubts, they must be brought to light not to shame the soul, but to awaken it. Samael's charge is to bring these things forward, to present them before the heavenly court, and to demand an answer. Not for his own satisfaction, but because truth must be acknowledged before grace can be rightly received. In this sense, Samael functions as the spiritual equivalent of fire in a crucible. His accusations strip away the outer layers of the soul, forcing it to confront what lies beneath. He is not interested in appearances. He challenges those who seem righteous, not because righteousness is a flaw, but because untested righteousness can become fragile and proud. Through his questions, through his scrutiny, the soul is either found wanting or made stronger. This is not an act of hatred. It is a form of divine pressure, holy interrogation that serves the cause of redemption. Mystical interpretations often align Samael's courtroom role with the Sephira of Gevurah, the sphere of judgment and strength within the tree of life. From this position, his task is to apply resistance, to raise objections, to force clarity. He does not operate against God's mercy, but beside it. Where chest opens the arms of compassion, Gevurah ensures that justice is not abandoned. Samael is the force that maintains that balance. His questions serve to purify mercy, to ensure it is not given cheaply or received lightly. This role, though stern, becomes a gift. For only when the soul is confronted can it truly respond. Only when the truth is revealed can healing begin. The trials Samael sets in motion are not traps laid to ensure failure. They are examinations that, if endured, bring forth something far greater than untested innocence. They bring forth wisdom. They produce endurance. They establish character. The soul, when faced with accusation and still choosing faithfulness, becomes unshakable. It is important to recognize that Samael's voice is not the final one. He initiates the prosecution, but God remains the judge. And God, who sees the heart in its entirety, never condemns without offering a path to restoration. Psalm 103 verse 9 reminds us, He will not always accuse, nor will He harbor His anger forever. Samael's accusations, then, are temporal tools used for eternal good. They are intense, but they are not eternal. They are allowed, but they are never sovereign. Even in his most pressing moments, Samael operates within the shadow of divine mercy. At times, his presence in the lives of the faithful is misread. Hardships, spiritual dryness, inner turmoil, these can feel like attacks, like signs of abandonment. But often, these are simply the echoes of Samael's challenge. They are reminders that the soul is still being shaped, still being tested, still being refined for a purpose beyond comfort. When he accuses, he calls forth what must be faced. And in facing it, the soul becomes free. He accuses not because he delights in failure, but because he is committed to truth. He is, in the most unsettling way, a servant of divine integrity. Without him, the heavenly court would risk sentimentality. With him, justice retains its teeth and grace retains its depth. He pushes, not to crush, but to reveal. He challenges, not to punish, but to purify. This is the holy tension in which he moves. A prosecutor who seeks not destruction, but transformation. An accuser whose goal is not despair, but discovery. A voice in the heavenly council who reminds us that true righteousness must be proven, not presumed. That faith without testing is a house without a foundation. In the divine courtroom, Samael speaks not for himself, but for the process that brings the soul from surface to substance. His words, though sharp, carve pathways to redemption. His presence, though feared, serves a justice that never loses sight of mercy. And in every accusation he brings, there lies an invitation, not to collapse in shame, but to rise in truth. When the soul wanders through its deepest questions, those that linger in the space between yearning and restraint, it often finds itself face to face with desires it cannot explain and forces it cannot easily name. In the language of mysticism, those unnamed forces are not random or chaotic. They are reflections of something older, something woven into the human story from the very beginning. And among the most potent symbols of this spiritual tension is the mysterious pairing of Samael and Lilith, a union that resists the simplicity of myth and calls instead for inner reflection. Lilith, in mystical tradition, is far more than a seductress or a demoness. She is the embodiment of unchecked longing, of feminine independence, of the refusal to be subdued. She appears as a challenge to the order of things, not merely in opposition, but as a necessary counterforce. Samael, already known as the agent of divine judgment and confrontation, becomes her counterpart, not to complete her in affection, but to activate her in trial. Together, they form an archetype, a mirror held up to the soul's most vulnerable places, where desire and ego merge, and where the choices we make become the architecture of our spiritual destiny. Their union, as described in Kabbalistic writings, does not reflect romance or affection in any earthly sense. It represents alignment, a convergence of energies that carry out divine trial through the mechanisms of seduction, power, and defiance. Samael, already a vessel of holy severity, joins with Lilith not in rebellion against heaven, but in the orchestration of a spiritual gauntlet through which every soul must pass. Their coming together is symbolic of the moment when temptation stops being theoretical and becomes personal, when spiritual ideals are no longer enough to carry the soul, and the reality of choice confronts us with its full weight. Lilith draws the soul with her beauty, her voice, her promise of self-sovereignty. She does not coerce, she entices. She whispers to the ego, to the wound, to the place in the heart that still longs to rule its own life. Samael gives her the stage, not because he celebrates rebellion, but because he knows that temptation must be seen before it can be overcome. He does not force sin upon anyone. He sets the conditions under which the truth of the heart is revealed. This dynamic reflects a profound spiritual truth, that trial does not begin with force, but with invitation. Desire does not scream, it calls softly. And the soul, drawn by its own hidden hungers, steps forward. Samael and Lilith, in this symbolic union, become the agents of that moment. They are not the cause of evil, they are the keepers of the mirror. They show the soul to itself, not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is when no one is watching, when no law restrains it, when it must decide whether it will be ruled by desire or rise above it. Such trials are not simply moral, they are existential. They are the crossroads between the self and the divine image. To fall into the arms of Lilith is not merely to sin, it is to embrace a vision of life that excludes accountability, that worships the self and silences the conscience. To resist her is not simply to flee from pleasure, it is to affirm that the soul desires more than indulgence, that it longs for union with something higher, even at the cost of denying its lesser cravings. Samael, standing beside her, does not interfere. He observes. He facilitates. He ensures that the test is allowed to run its course without interference or illusion. In many ways, he is the spiritual architect of the terrain in which Lilith moves. Her presence awakens the desire, but it is Samael who ensures that desire leads to confrontation. He is not her puppet master, nor her slave. He's the one who bears witness to the truth of what temptation reveals. This collaboration between severity and seduction does not serve destruction. It serves illumination. When the soul survives an encounter with Lilith, when it passes through the desire she embodies without surrendering to it, something changes. The soul emerges with deeper clarity, with authority over its passions, with strength that only trial can produce. The presence of Lilith does not corrupt the soul, it reveals its hidden fractures. The function of Samael is not to condemn the soul for those fractures, but to create the space where they become visible and therefore healable. Their union, then, is not evil in itself. It is dangerous, certainly. It is volatile, without question. But it is also allowed. It exists not outside of divine knowledge, but within it. It becomes the field upon which the battle for spiritual identity is fought. The stakes are high not because God has abandoned the soul, but because God has trusted it to choose. And that choice is never more real than when the voice of Lilith calls and the silence of Samael permits the answer. In the Zohar and related mystical writings, the symbolic union is often presented as part of a hidden cosmic structure, one that includes both the right and left sides of the divine, both mercy and judgment, both light and concealment. Samael and Lilith become reflections of the forces that shape human destiny, not because they overpower it, but because they make freedom visible. Their dance is not one of affection, but of function. It is a choreography of challenge, set in motion to awaken the soul to its own power. What emerges from this understanding is a vision of temptation as sacred trial, not a punishment, not a random cruelty, but a gate, a fire, a moment when all masks fall away and the soul must choose who it will become. Lilith, with her allure, plays her part perfectly. Samael, with his severity, plays his part without flaw. Neither acts out of rebellion. Both serve a plan that leads not to ruin, but to refinement. And for those who face this trial, not in legend, but in life, it is not enough to simply resist. One must understand what is being revealed. What does this desire say about the wound it touches? What does this longing reveal about what the heart truly lacks? To pass through the fire is not to emerge unscathed, but to emerge awakened. The soul that walks past Lilith's call and stands still in Samael's silence discovers something profound. It finds its own voice. It finds a deeper will. And it finds that even in the place where desire is strongest, the call of the divine is stronger still. The union of these two figures, then, becomes a portrait of the human struggle, not with evil alone, but with the false self, with the illusion of control, with the longing to be both free and whole. It is in that struggle, fierce and beautiful, that the soul begins to understand the meaning of holiness. Some lessons cannot be taught in quiet moments of serenity, nor absorbed through gentle inspiration alone. There are truths too deep to be revealed by mere instruction. They demand friction, resistance, confrontation. Growth of the soul does not take root in perfect stillness. It rises through pressure, through discomfort, through the fire of challenge. And in that fire, one often finds the subtle presence of Samael, not as a being sent to ruin, but as one who watches the flames to ensure they serve their purpose. Samael's name often carries the weight of fear, yet in the hidden wisdom of the mystics, that very fear is understood as the first spark of transformation. For when the soul is afraid, it is awake. When it is troubled, it is alert. And when it is tempted, it is placed at the edge of decision, a point where all illusions collapse and the truth of the inner life must speak. The temptations permitted by Samael are not traps laid in hatred. They are invitations into the furnace of self-knowledge. They strip away the outer layers of inherited belief, cultural comfort, and spiritual pretense. What remains is something raw, something real, something ready to be shaped. No soul advances into maturity without first facing its own reflection, distorted and magnified through trial. Samael, in this capacity, becomes like the blacksmith who holds the metal in the flame, not to destroy its shape, but to make it pliable. Temptation, in his hands, is not chaos. It is an instrument of divine refinement, calibrated with painful precision to draw out the soul's unspoken flaws. The allure of selfishness, the pride that hides behind virtue, the desire masked as devotion, all these are brought into the light when temptation enters. It is not in the absence of temptation that the soul proves itself, but in its confrontation. Spiritual purity does not arise from isolation, from being kept far from darkness. It emerges in the moment when darkness stands near, offering itself as freedom, and the soul chooses otherwise. That moment of refusal, born not from fear but from conviction, is the forge in which character is made. And Samael is present in that moment, not to celebrate failure, but to witness transformation. Many imagine temptation as a form of spiritual sabotage, but in the mystical view, it is closer to a test of alignment. It asks the soul to declare what it truly values, not with words, but with actions. In the absence of pressure, it is easy to believe oneself strong. But when the heart is offered exactly what it secretly desires, and still turns away, then strength becomes real. This is the path that Samael oversees. He administers the test not as a judge waiting to condemn, but as a divine examiner whose task is to ensure that the faith professed is more than a fragile idea. Temptation reveals what cannot be seen in peace. It presses on the wound, and the reaction that follows exposes whether the soul has healed or merely hidden its pain. Samael does not create the wound. He presses until it reveals itself. He is not the surgeon, but the pressure that makes the surgery necessary. And in this way, his presence, though difficult, becomes indispensable to the soul's healing. The sacred texts do not shy away from this uncomfortable truth. They present examples where the righteous were tested not to be broken, but to be proven. Abraham is told to offer Isaac, not because God delights in cruelty, but because faith must be more than theoretical. David is drawn into sin not by random chance, but by the unveiling of his own unchecked desires. Even Yeshua, before beginning his ministry, is led into the wilderness to be tempted, not because he was unworthy, but because the journey into light must pass through shadow. These trials did not occur in spite of divine will, they occurred through it. And each time, the soul that endured emerged transformed. Samael serves this process. He is not the cause of failure, but the architect of the crossroads. The choice still belongs to the individual. The test is not rigged, but it is necessary. Growth cannot come without pressure, and pressure cannot come without challenge. The beauty of temptation is that it does not command, it offers. It gives the soul the dignity of decision, the weight of freedom, and the consequence of choice. In many ways, Samael becomes the keeper of the fire. Not a fire that consumes indiscriminately, but one that purifies by stages, by intensity, by persistence. When gold is refined, it is not by accident. It is held in the crucible until all that is not gold has been removed. The process is painful. The flames do not comfort, but what emerges at the end is something eternal. The soul, once purified, shines with a clarity that no comfort could produce. This is the paradox of divine discipline, that pain can be merciful, that loss can be gain, that temptation can be the first step toward holiness. The presence of Samael does not mean God has turned away. It often means that God is drawing near through a different path, a path that does not coddle, but that calls the soul to rise. The mystics understood this fire not as punishment, but as a hidden form of love. A love that trusts the soul enough to let it be tested. A love that does not protect from every storm, but that uses the storm to build resilience. A love that does not always shield, but that always refines. And so the soul walks through trial, not alone, but observed by the one who holds the flame. Samael does not rejoice in the soul's fall. He observes, he permits, he withdraws when the work is done. And in his silence, in his absence after the trial, one finds not emptiness, but elevation. The soul, having faced the worst in itself, can now rise with new strength. It has passed through the fire. It has chosen light over ease. And in that choice, it is no longer merely innocent, it is wise. Some truths cannot be seen in the full brightness of day. They require the contrast of night, the obscurity of shadow, the silence that follows the removal of every familiar comfort. It is in these dim and uncertain spaces that the soul learns to listen more carefully, to search more honestly, to anchor itself not in feeling, but in something deeper. Within this quiet obscurity, the presence of Samael becomes not a contradiction to divine order, but its mysterious affirmation. He is not the opposite of light. He is the contour that gives light its meaning. He is not evil, he is necessary. In the human mind, it is tempting to divide everything into categories of right and wrong, holy and unholy, acceptable and dangerous. But the spiritual world rarely conforms to these clean separations. God, in the fullness of his design, does not work only through softness and visible goodness. He moves through resistance, through delay, through disruption. And it is in that resistance that the soul grows. The role of Samael is carved out of this deeper understanding of how the divine shapes what is eternal. His darkness is not rebellion, but refinement. His shadow does not block the light, it frames it. The ancient sages understood that nothing in creation exists without purpose. Even what appears threatening or difficult serves a higher function when seen from the vantage point of heaven. Samael embodies divine severity, yes, but it is a severity placed under exacting control. He does not move outside the will of God, and his presence is never random. He steps in where ease would stagnate the soul, where uninterrupted comfort would dull the senses. He is the hand that breaks through illusion when gentleness has failed to awaken. Consider the soul that has only known blessing. Its gratitude, while sincere, may remain shallow. Its faith, while heartfelt, may be untested. But when that same soul is led through a season of drought or silence or inner conflict, something begins to change. The absence of felt light causes the soul to search for the deeper source. This is where Samael moves, not as an enemy, but as the one who draws the soul into confrontation with its truest self. He brings about disruption, not to destroy, but to make ready. It is in this disruption that the stars begin to appear. Just as the night sky reveals what daylight conceals, so does the spiritual night unveil what comfort often obscures. Samael's task is not to extinguish the stars, but to summon the night. He is the force that introduces contrast, the trial that forces the soul to decide whether it will trust the unseen or collapse under fear. His darkness has no power over the light. It only brings into relief what the light truly is. This dynamic may seem harsh to the modern sensibility, which often confuses comfort with goodness. But the soul is not shaped for temporary ease, it is formed for eternal union. And eternity does not belong to the unchallenged. It belongs to those who have faced the wilderness and chosen to walk forward anyway. Samael is the voice that echoes in that wilderness, asking the soul what it really believes, whom it really trusts, and what it is truly willing to become. He is not cruel. He does not delight in pain. But pain is one of the few things that bypasses the surface and reaches the deep. Samael's work strikes where the masks fall away. His presence often precedes transformation, not because he transforms the soul himself, but because he creates the conditions under which transformation becomes possible. Without his role, spiritual growth would stall under the illusion that everything is already whole. To call him evil is to misunderstand the role of divine tension. Light is not made brighter by erasing darkness, but by overcoming it. If Samael's presence leads to despair, it is not because he desires it, but because the soul has refused to see the invitation hidden in trial. If, however, the soul learns to see the darkness not as abandonment, but as initiation, then Samael becomes not a stumbling block, but a stepping stone. The mystics often spoke of the hidden light, the Orhaganus, a light that is only revealed through struggle, through deep spiritual seeking. Samael is not the keeper of this light, but the guardian of the gate that leads to it. He stands not to bar the way, but to ensure that only those who are willing to be refined may pass through. His shadow is not a denial of grace, it is its preparation. Every soul must eventually learn that the divine is not confined to the pleasant and the peaceful. God is also present in the storm, in the silence, in the strange and sacred darkness where everything seems to fall apart. It is in these places that Samael does his work, not as an agent of destruction, but as a servant of divine purpose. He is the unseen teacher whose lessons are written in the language of adversity. And though his methods are severe, they are never empty. Each wound allowed under his watch is purposeful, calibrated, necessary. When the soul looks back on its journey, it rarely gives thanks for its easiest seasons. It remembers the fire. It remembers the nights when everything was stripped away and only the deepest truths remained. It remembers how something eternal was born in the very places where comfort had vanished. These are the fruits of shadow. These are the gifts of trial. And these are the moments in which Samael, silent and watchful, fulfills his sacred task. His presence is not a flaw in the order of things, it is part of the order itself. He does not stand outside of heaven's design. He serves it with unwavering precision. To recognize this is to abandon shallow definitions of light and darkness, and to embrace the mystery that the divine often conceals his greatest work beneath the veil of trial. And so Samael remains where few wish to go, at the edge of understanding, at the border between comfort and transformation, between certainty and faith, not evil, but necessary, not separate from the light, but shaped by it, responding to it, returning all things to it. He is the shadow within the light, the part we fear, the part we resist, the part we ultimately come to bless. As the arc of time curves toward its culmination, and the final movements of the divine drama draw near, the question arises not only of what will happen, but who will be entrusted to carry out the most severe, final tasks. In this closing act of history, where shadows lengthen before the dawn of eternity, Samael emerges once again, not in opposition to the divine story, but as a vital character in its final unfolding. The apocalyptic texts do not treat him as an outsider to the end times vision. They imply something far more sobering, that the one who once tempted Eden, who accuses in the heavenly court, and who refines the soul through trial, may also be the one who brings the world itself into judgment. But judgment, in the divine sense, is not synonymous with vengeance. It is not rage, not mindless destruction, not chaos unleashed. Judgment is clarity. It is the final unveiling of what was always true but long hidden. In that moment, when the veil of illusion is finally torn, what is false cannot stand. Samael, in this climactic task, may be called not to punish for the sake of pain, but to reveal truth with such force that no deception can remain. He does not carry the flame to destroy indiscriminately. He wields it as a purifier of the world, burning away what has decayed, so that what is eternal may rise without distortion. Throughout the apocalyptic visions scattered across sacred literature, from the books of Enoch to echoes in Daniel, From late Midrashic interpretations to mystical eschatologies, we find signs of an agent who brings about the final separation, the last sifting of souls, the collapse of everything built on pretense. This is not the task of a rebel. It is the work of one who has always walked the edge of heaven's design, holding the shadow not to eclipse the light, but to prepare the soul to stand in it fully. Samael's role in these texts is not melodramatic, it is surgical. He divides the real from the counterfeit. His arrival signals not chaos, but exposure. He does not bring the end, he reveals what the end always was. It is in this context that the severity of his presence becomes most necessary. For in the final days, mercy alone will not suffice. There comes a moment when choices must be honored, when hearts must be measured, when justice must be completed. Not because God delights in division, but because eternity cannot be built on falsehood. The fire that comes is not for spectacle. It is for refinement. And Samael, having served this purpose in individual souls across generations, now extends that same purifying function to the world itself. Illusions that once seduced civilizations, power structures rooted in pride, systems constructed on greed, spiritual movements corrupted by ego, cannot survive this fire. They crumble under the weight of truth, and the task of bringing that collapse to completion may be Samael's last appointed task. His severity, once applied to individuals, now bears upon nations, cultures, and every structure that has positioned itself against the true kingdom. Yet even in this, his power is bounded. He is not free to roam. He does not act as an independent force of apocalypse. He acts only when summoned, only when allowed, only when the divine judge has rendered his verdict and permitted the execution of final justice. And when that moment comes, Samael does not hesitate. His obedience has always been exacting. He does not question. He does not delay. He fulfills. What follows is not silence, but revelation. With the illusion stripped away and every mask torn from the face of creation, the world stands bare before its Maker. In this unveiled moment, the full glory of God does not enter as a gentle breeze. It arrives as overwhelming light. And it is in that light that Samael's task concludes. Not because he has failed, but because there is no longer a need for his presence. The fire has done its work. What remains does not require testing, because it is already true. This fading of Samael is not a dismissal, it is completion. Just as the surgeon's work ends when the healing begins, just as the sculptor sets down the chisel when the form is revealed, Samael steps back into the silence he has always honored. His disappearance is not marked by celebration or mourning. It is natural, necessary. For the world he once served to test, to refine, and to confront has now become what it was always meant to be, whole, clear, and bathed in truth. Even so, his presence in those final days must not be underestimated. He will not appear with thunderous declarations or chaotic violence. His presence will be felt in the unraveling of lies, in the shaking of what was built on sand, in the collapse of pride that resisted surrender. He will come quietly and powerfully, not as an invading enemy, but as a loyal servant of finality. He will not stand alone, but alongside the greater unfolding of divine will. His touch will not be random, it will be precise. His hand will not strike in rage, but in alignment. The souls who have passed through his trials will recognize him, not with affection perhaps, but with understanding. They will know the work he came to do, the fire he carried, the mirror he held. And those who have submitted themselves to truth, even through pain, will have no fear of his presence. For they have already passed through his fire and emerged ready. They will meet him not as strangers, but as those who once stood on the edge of the refining flame and chose the path of surrender. As the world breathes its final breath of shadow, and the full light of divine glory floods all things, Samael's chapter will close, not with noise, but with resolution. He will fade like the last ember after a long night, giving way to the morning that no longer needs a fire to see. His role will be remembered, not as a curse upon the world, but as the hand that held it steady while it was reshaped. In the end, his shadow will not remain, for where there is only glory, shadow has no place. But the work of that shadow, the refinement, the purification, the fierce and necessary disruption, will echo in the strength of those who were made ready because of him. Even as the final pages of prophecy unfold, and the fires of judgment give way to the brilliance of unending light, the story of Samael does not end in opposition or disgrace. His journey, traced through shadows and trials, was never about rebellion. It was always about refinement. And in this closing vision, one last question remains. What does he mean for you? Not as a figure of ancient mystery or apocalyptic awe, but as a presence, silent yet persistent, shaping your personal path toward God. Samael, though fearsome in appearance, is not your enemy. He is not the destroyer of faith, but its unrelenting trainer. He is the one permitted to draw near not to ruin your soul, but to expose what weakens it. He brings temptation, not to delight in your failure, but to give you the opportunity to choose truth when lies feel more comfortable. He allows discomfort, not to crush your spirit, but to reveal where you've built on sand. And in every moment of inner battle, in every silent confrontation with fear, ego, or desire, it may well be his presence you're encountering, not as a punishment, but as a divine summons to rise. What if the pain that has shaken your peace, the doubt that has troubled your heart, the struggle you've kept hidden even from those closest to you, was allowed by heaven to prepare you for something greater? What if this silence was not abandonment, but the quiet testing of your soul's foundation? What if Samael has stood nearby, not as a foe, but as the architect of your transformation, the one who pushed just hard enough to awaken what was dormant within you? You were not created to be fragile. You were not designed to live a life shielded from trial. Every fire you've walked through has refined your purpose. Every temptation you've faced has revealed your hunger for truth. Every moment of resistance has prepared you for the kind of strength that cannot be faked. And in all of this, Samael has not worked against you. He has stood as your hidden ally, your stern companion, your unwelcome teacher with a divine assignment. He may never appear to you in form or speak in words, but his presence will be felt in those critical crossroads of your life. When compromise tempts, when shortcuts appeal, when easy paths seduce. He is not there to drag you down, but to force you to rise. His very silence is a question. Who will you become when no one is watching? What will you choose when the choice costs you something? These are the moments where eternity is shaped, not by emotion, but by truth. You were not made to avoid fire. You were made to pass through it and come out radiant. You were not made to hide from your shadows. You were made to stand in their presence and declare, I choose light. And the trials that made you question everything may, in the end, become the very proof that you were never weak, only unfinished. Samael does not walk with you to destroy. He walks with you so that when you reach the gates of eternity, you do so not with illusions, but with a soul that has been tested, purified, and made ready. His voice, when it echoes in your trials, is not a curse. It is a call to awaken, a call to endure, a call to become who you were always meant to be. Thank you for joining this journey into the depths of spiritual mystery, challenge, and transformation. If this message has spoken to something in you, if it has helped you understand your own trials in a new light, please consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss future content like this. Give the video a like if it encouraged or inspired you. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts or experiences, and pass it on to someone close to you who might be walking through their own season of refining. Let this message be a reminder that even in your darkness, even in your struggle, even in your silence, God is working, and the fire is not there to destroy you, but to reveal who you truly are.